Welcome to the STEM Talk. In just 30 minutes each month, join experts from across the STEM landscape as they provide factual information, practical strategies, and actionable resources to help you navigate the ever-changing world of STEM education, workforce development, policy, and advocacy. Hosted by the After School STEM Hub, STEM Education Coalition, and STEM Ecosystems, the STEM Talk creates a safe space for dialogue while maintaining a focus on information that matters to you and the community that you serve. Welcome back to the STEM Talk. We're kicking off 2026. Hi, my name is Jenny Frank, and I am the Director of the STEM Ecosystem Initiative here at TIES. As fiscal year 2025 closes and 2026 begins, STEM funding timelines and priorities are shifting. It's a pivotal moment, one that requires us to wrap up our current commitments strategically while also positioning ourselves for what's coming next. Over the past year, we've watched the federal funding landscape evolve in ways none of us could ever have predicted. New opportunities have emerged, familiar programs have faced uncertainty, and the advocacy playbook continues to change. So, as we enter 2026, understanding where things stand and where they're headed has never been more important. And that's exactly what we are unpacking today. We have a full house on today's episode of the STEM Talk, starting with Della Cronin, Principal at Bose Public Affairs Group, Anita Krishnamurthy, Senior Vice President of STEM and Youth Civic Engagement, After School Alliance, Alexis Steins-Rowe, Vice President for Innovation and Outreach at the After School Alliance, and Leslie Brooks, Manager of the After School STEM Hub. All right, team, let's get started. We'll turn it over to Della.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be back with you in the new year. As the slides come up, I'm pleased to report that we're starting off with some good news from Washington, D.C. Some spending bills have been passed. A lot of work and effort went into these bills from advocates and stakeholders and folks on Capitol Hill who work on these bills year in, year out. So let's talk about some good news. Today we're going to cover the final, for reals, the final FY 2026 appropriations update. We've been talking about this on just about every one of these STEM talks that we've had since the start. But Congress and the White House have finally wrapped up the appropriations spending debate, at least the one that we as a community watch. The Homeland Security bill is still an outlier that needs to be dealt with in the coming weeks. But you won't be getting actually alerts from this community on that bill. And then we'll talk about some other things that are happening on Capitol Hill of interest, and then sort of a potpourri of issues to watch in the coming year. Okay, so since we skipped last month, it's worth reminding folks that there was a 3-bill minibus, which included the bipartisan Commerce Justice Science bill that was enacted in January. In the Good News Department, that bill rejected White House proposals to cut NSF and other research agencies and STEM investments. In particular, the White House had proposed the elimination of the STEM Education Directorate at the National Science Foundation. Republicans in the House had been on board with that recommendation. The Senate did not feel the same way, and ultimately the final spending bill preserves that directorate and STEM education investments there, which we consider to be a win, a big win. In addition, there was a concern that the bill would have provisions from Republicans that specifically said you can't use any of these funds on DEI-related programs or initiatives, and that's a heavy lift, particularly for the National Science Foundation, where broadening participation is part of their mission. That language was not included in the bill, so that we consider to be a win as well over there at the National Science Foundation. The thing that the National Science Foundation and the other research agencies the challenge that they're going to face now, and this is a familiar challenge for those agencies and for those of you that rely on funds that come from those agencies, They're now going to need to spend those funds before the end of the fiscal year. The end of the fiscal year is September 30th. So that gives them a truncated cycle for getting money out the door. So be on the lookout for notices from the agencies that fund work that you are doing, and be responsive to those in short order. Okay, this says yesterday, but it was actually 2 days ago, that President Trump signed into law a 5-bill minibus that includes the FY 2026 Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Appropriations Bill. This is among the largest spending bills. It funds the Department of Education, it funds the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Health and Human Services, lots of education and research money in this bill. Ultimately, what the president signed, at least for the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education portion of the bill, was level funding for the Department of Education at around $79 billion. There were minor pluses and minuses in various programs at that agency, but overall it's pretty much level funding compared to last year. Here you can see some of those pluses and minuses, a minor increase in Title I. It's notable that Title II was level funded since that was slated for elimination by both the White House and House Republicans. Title IV Part A, or the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grant Program, which is funds that go directly to districts that can fund, and they can fund STEM education programs with those funds, was level funded as well. Title IV Part B, which is where the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program is, was also level funded. And let me just reiterate, level funding was a win this year. So we are pleased about this. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act saw a minor increase. And then career and technical education state grants were also level funded. They had been slated for some cuts from some Republicans, but it's worth noting that they have been transferred to the Department of Labor via an interagency agreement that was in place since last July. So not sort of the later in the year interagency agreements, but they've been over at the Department of Labor since July. Some other things that happened in the bill that are worth noting is that it funds programs that the Department of Education chose not to fund in FY25. And when I say that, what I mean is that there were some competitive grant programs at the Department of Education that leadership there decided not to run competitions for last year. It's worth noting that Congress said, no, we think these programs are important. We're going to continue to fund them. And in turn, we're going to expect you to run competitions and send those funds to states, LEAs, others that compete for them. It also funded programs where the Department of Education had fired most of its staff and sent a message to them that, not only do we expect you to run these programs, we expect you to run them with the staff required to do so efficiently and in response to the needs of the states and others who receive them. It limits the amount of money that agencies can transfer from one to the other. Once again, it rejects the White House and Republican cuts. It did not directly resist the interagency agreements. For those of you who pay close attention to this stuff, you may know that in December, Senator Murray and others were trying to get an amendment put on that bill that would have rejected the interagency agreements. They were unsuccessful in doing that. But there is language in there that requests ongoing reports from the Department of Education and the other agencies that are involved in those agreements to tell Congress how that transition is going. So let's pause to celebrate. We, throughout the year, had asked you all to do a number of things, write to members of Congress, talk to folks about the importance of these programs. Thank you for doing that. I know it was a tough year on so many fronts for those of us in education and STEM education, and just want to say advocacy really does work, and please continue to do it. We have a moment to celebrate and we should take it. But no rest for the weary. So even though we just finished with the appropriations bill cycle, It's going to start again very, very soon. The president is giving his State of the Union address on February 24th. This is a visual representation of the federal budget timeline. If it worked the way it was supposed to, which it hasn't in a very long time, but it's worth knowing how it's supposed to work. The unofficial start for that process is the State of the Union address, followed quickly by the release of the White House's budget request for the year. And we are bracing for both. And we are going to be looking at another budget cycle where we will expect at least the White House to propose cuts to some of the programs that we care about once again. Hopefully this year, Congress will do more than appropriations bills. In the first year of a new administration, oftentimes, at least in the Senate, they spend a lot of time confirming appointees, getting the administration set up, that sort of thing. We're hoping that in year 2 of the administration and in year 2 of the 119th Congress, we can get to some legislation that addresses some of the issues that we care about. It's worth noting that the Senate Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee Chairman Bill Cassidy from Louisiana is seeking input on a number of issues. This first one is he feels strongly that it's important that we know how students are doing year to year. He believes in the value of growth measurement in figuring out how kids are doing in reading and math and other subjects. He is asking for stakeholders to weigh in on that issue. Should we be waiting until the 3rd grade to start assessing students? Should they be assessed yearly? Should we be doing sampling? Should we be testing everyone? Those sorts of questions that are big ones in K-12 education are the kinds of issues that he is soliciting input on. There's a link on the here, and then I'm sure it'll be shared in the chat. If you go there, there's a number of questions that they're looking for input on by the end of next week, if you care to offer your perspective on that. The second announcement from the chairman was that he's launching an inquiry into declining math scores. He has heard, and this is not a new issue, but that colleges are really struggling with the math skills of incoming freshmen. He's very curious as to why that's the case. Is that what's not working in K-12 math, what's not working in teacher preparation. He's sent letters to a number of institutions of higher education asking them to convey what they think is going on. So it's interesting and important that this leader on Capitol Hill is looking into math education and how to get better outcomes for our students. Over on the other side of the Capitol, the House Education and Workforce Committee continues to hold a series of AI hearings. Some of them, almost all of them, touch on education. I think as members of Congress and others learn more about AI and what it is and what it might be, they are very much aware of the fact that AI will be part of the skills that are needed in this coming workforce, and where and how should young people and others be exposed to those skills. Also, a piece of legislation passed the Senate Commerce Committee, COPPA, which is the Children Online Protection Act, which is a piece of legislation that has had trouble getting passed over the last few years, but is about privacy, kids being safe online, and we're hopeful that that bill will get a vote on the Senate floor sometime soon. Okay, so here's sort of a hodgepodge of other issues that we're watching and that could affect STEM education and stakeholders. So you'll recall that last year, President Trump proposed a new $100,000 fee for H-1B visas. That program touches a lot of different communities, a lot of different people, a lot of different organizations. It has been opposed by a number of folks, which have led to lawsuits being filed hoping to block it. It also affects education interests, maybe not in your district, but there are districts that use that program to hire educators and teachers. Also, the fees that come from that program affect the iTest program over at the National Science Foundation and other STEM programs. So it is a program with a lot of different tentacles into STEM education and education. So we are watching how the implementation of that program goes. In addition, over at the Department of Education, you'll recall at the beginning of the administration, the Institute of Education Sciences experienced a severe cut in staff. The leaders at the Department of Education say they want to rebuild that agency for modern times. At the end of last year, recommendations were given to the secretary on how to do that. So we'll be watching how that might proceed this year as well. Over back on Capitol Hill, there is talk of consideration of revising and updating the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We are watching that for how it affects youth workforce readiness and how informal education programs might access the programs that are there. Also, how that piece of legislation can give young people career readiness skills and other skills that we're talking about on Capitol Hill and elsewhere quite often these days. There'll be, out of the conversation around what's happening in childcare funds, there will be ongoing examination from Republicans of waste, fraud, and abuse in federal programs. I think that the Oversight Committee, particularly in the House, will be holding a number of hearings on what's going on in federal programs. And another sort of bit of good news, the bills that were recently passed contain a number of earmarks that funded education, STEM education, after school, informal science programs. And if you or your organization have the wherewithal to apply, seek an earmark from your congressional delegation, they're back. Folks are doing them. Folks are feeling like there is a role for Congress to play in directing federal funding to their constituents. And if you go to your the three members of your congressional delegation, you can see on their website they outline how to do it with their office. And I would, if you have the capacity to do so, at least explore that possibility for your organization, assuming that you're a nonprofit. So we've got a lot to talk about today. I will monitor the Q&A in the chat for any federal questions as we turn to the next speaker.
Great, thanks so much. And as Leslie just mentioned, our special edition of the STEM Talk yesterday covered the topic of new tax credits that'll come online in the 2027 tax year. And the recording of that talk will be available if you missed it yesterday, and you can catch up and become more informed if you missed it live. But today we wanted to answer some of the big questions that came up during that conversation today. And my colleague Alexis Stanis-Rao is here from the Fiscal Alliance to help answer those questions. But before I pass it off to her, I just wanted to remind people of what we're talking about, which is that there's a new federal scholarship tax credit that's coming online in January 2027. Taxpayers who donate to entities called Scholarship Granting Organizations, or SGOs, can get a tax credit equal to the donation up to $1,700 per year. And these SGOs can then provide scholarships to children whose parents or guardians apply to the SGO for the scholarships. And the Treasury Department is still honing this and addressing many of the comments and questions that were raised when they announced it. We expect them to be releasing those revised guidelines by early summer this year. But in the meantime, Alexis is here to answer some of the big questions, and I'll turn it over to you, Alexis. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Anita. So as Anita said, this is a work in progress. Things are evolving. I have a couple of questions that were raised multiple times yesterday during yesterday's STEM talk that I'll try and address right now. A big caveat is we don't know everything. We're still trying to understand more of how this process will evolve. And some of these questions may have to wait until the initial round of regulations are issued later this summer. But one of the questions that came up frequently was, what if our organization provides programming free of charge? Do we need to charge families in order to be able to access these scholarships? A number of providers already have established tiered payment structures and pay scales to allow them to align funds from philanthropy, scholarships, childcare vouchers, which occasionally have a parent pay component, parent pay or public funding in order to serve additional students, to try and boost quality, enhance curricular offerings, and more. This might be an option to consider for your organization. We're going to try and dig into this question a little bit more and hopefully showcase some ideas on how this could work in future blogs or webinars. So definitely pay attention to what we're posting on afterschoolalliance.org. Will the funds go to service providing organizations or to the students directly? As this is a scholarship granting organizations, or SGOs, will select and administer the scholarship funds. So taxpayers will give a donation of up to $1,700 to that scholarship granting organization in order to qualify for the tax credit. The scholarship granting organization will then select and then award directly to the families of selected students. Parents are then able to use those scholarships to pay for various eligible education expenses at public, private, and religious schools. And after-school programming is likely one of those expenses. Another question that came up was, where can I find a list of SGOs in my state if my state has already opted into the tax credit? So by January 1st, 2027, those lists must be submitted to Treasury and should be made public. But it's a good idea to start thinking about what the SGO landscape looks like in your state much sooner than that. It's likely that many SGOs will start forming throughout 2026, so you might be able to do a web search in your state and search for your state and tax scholarship to see which organizations may already be getting information out to the field. You might want to see if they would be willing to offer scholarships for participating in after-school programs. And if there are no SGOs in your area or your state, or at least those that you're aware of, you might want to see if you can help a nonprofit establish an SGO to serve the after-school field. And then finally, where can I find out if my governor has opted into the tax credit? Ballotopedia, and I'll put the link in the chat after I'm done, has an up-to-date list of states that have opted into the tax credit. And if your state has not opted in, you should definitely consider having a conversation with the governor or state legislators or committees or whomever would be making the decision about opting in, that after school is an allowable use and that there may be many benefits that help to support after school and out of school time STEM programming as well. So Anita, I'll turn it back to you. And thank you for having me on this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Alexis. Jenny and Leslie, I'm gonna turn this back over to you.
All right. Yes, thank you both so much. And if anyone has additional questions about that, feel free to send us an email, stemhub@afterschoolalliance.org. And now me and Jenny are so excited to share with you about this advocacy, peer networking, and resource platform we've been putting together for you, really spearheaded by Jenny at the STEM Ecosystems. I'm going to share my screen and Jenny's going to walk through a demo of it. But before I do that, in the chat, I'm putting the link so that you can all register to access it.
We are so excited to introduce to you an online community called the STEM Advocacy Hub. This is an online community using the platform Circle to allow you to better connect with resources and experts in the field. So let me give you a tour. This is the hub, and as you can see on the left-hand side is a navigation bar, and it has lots of different opportunities online for advocacy. The first one, which you all know about, obviously, is the STEM Talk. And so what we've done is we have gathered all of the STEM Talks that we have ever done and created not only a YouTube podcast, but we've also created for you a live brief. This is an example of one of the talks that we just most recently did, this special episode on tax credits. So as you can see, not only can you watch the STEM Talk, but you can also read through the brief to better understand our expert perspectives, as well as get some tips and tricks of what you can do in your own action plan, including talking points and strategic actions. Another wonderful space on the online community is our Advocacy Resource Center. In this space, you can find really great advocacy resources to help you to advocate with confidence. You can go through and scroll the available resources that we have available to you, and it is really easy to engage. Simply click on the resource, read a little synopsis about it, and click on the link to take you directly to that resource. Many of these resources we've shared in our previous STEM Talks, so this is a great place to organize those resources and make sure that they are available to you anytime that you feel you need them. The next part is the advocacy field expert space. And as you can see here, we have some very recognizable faces, including James Brown and Della Cronin, who are frequent guests on our STEM Talk podcast. By clicking on their profile, you can see a little bit more about them, learn about their areas of expertise, and also feel free to reach out by replying with your thoughts and comments. Lastly, and probably the part that I am most excited about, is our peer network. This is a space where you can find other members who are also in the advocacy space for STEM. It allows you to search using this search bar geographically, how close someone is to you, if they're online, if they recently joined. You can even look through and see different kinds of tags. I really consider this to be the bread and butter of the online community. When you find somebody who has similar goals and interests and you'd love to connect, all you need to do is simply click on the connect button. And just like that, you send a personal note and a request, very similar to LinkedIn, and you are connected. And then that way you can engage and chat and talk and share over the online community using direct messages and other chat threads. I hope that you have enjoyed this very quick walk around. We promise to send lots of support to help to show you all of the cool tools and features of this online community. And again, our hope is to connect this community because we know together we are stronger and we can make some serious change, as we've learned from Della earlier today. I'll turn it back over to you, Leslie.
Yes, Stella, I might start out as I'm looking through the questions that were added in the chat for you too, to pick a couple for you. Real quick, why do you feel people or organizations should consider applying to their representatives for congressionally directed spending or project funding?
Yeah, so I think that it's a way. So first
Or
of all, because
earmarks.
right, you might get money. Like you might be successful and you would get money for your program. But even if you don't, it's an opportunity to build a relationship with a congressional office in a deeper way. It's also an opportunity for you to tell the folks who represent you on Capitol Hill about your work and what your program is doing and its reach. And it's an opportunity to argue for the worthiness of your program to receive public dollars. And those are all, I think, worthy exercises as an advocate. But I also know that will take time and effort, and everybody has a lot that they're balancing these days. So you'll have to decide if it's worth your time and effort to pursue that.
Awesome. Okay, there's one question in the chat for you, Della. Do school districts know that they can use Title II funds?
Yeah, so I answered that in the Q&A. Actually, Leslie,
okay.
a lot of those questions went in both places. So, but
gotcha.
I'll answer it for the group in case people didn't read it. So the question is, do folks know about the flexibilities that are available in Title II and what folks can spend those funds on? So I think that probably varies by expertise of people who are running programs. I would say that states make a lot of decisions about how those federal dollars are spent, and there's lots of flexibility for them to do that. And sometimes they make that decision and they say, look, we're transferring all our Title II money to Title I this year because that's what we think is best for the state. And so they sort of take away that flexibility at the state level. So if you are interested in figuring out how your state is or isn't using some of those flexibilities they have in the federal programs, you might want to check out their ESSA plan, which should be available online. And you might just want to talk to your state Department of Education about what it is they're planning on doing with their Title II money, their Title I money, and making the case for them using it for what you think is important for the students you serve.
And there was one other question that, Leslie, that I think didn't make it into the Q&A, but it was from Bob Russell, Della, about whether we know what the split of NSF EDU funding is in the approach bill. That was
the answer is I don't know off the top of my head. So if Bob Russell doesn't know.
It looks like there's a question for Alexis too. We have a little bit more time. Can the tax credit be applied for and used by local education agencies to cover OST costs and field trips, supplies, transportation, etc.?
So the legislation says that it can be used to cover extended day programs. So if the scholarship is covering the student to participate in the after school program, I would assume that you could apply the proceeds that come from that scholarship to cover field trip supplies, whatever the operating costs are for the program.
Okay, thank you. And yes, we will be sharing the recording and the slides and everything after this. So if for whatever reason, Melissa, I saw you had a technical glitch and couldn't see the slides, we will definitely provide access to those for you all.
Thank you for joining us for this insightful discussion on the policy landscape affecting STEM education and workforce development. We hope you've gained valuable perspectives and actionable strategies from our conversations. We'll continue this important dialogue with critical insights about top STEM priorities and more guidance on navigating the current advocacy landscape. To learn more about the work of STEM Education Coalition, After School STEM Hub, and STEM ecosystems, please visit our websites. Until next time, keep advocating for a strong STEM education and workforce nationwide.